Barcelona's season has shifted from optimism to open tension in a matter of weeks, and what began as routine summer movement in the transfer market has mutated into a story about identity, authority, and consequence. The club that once set the template for footballing philosophy now faces questions that reach beyond formations and fee structures. Who leads in the dressing room, whose voice shapes the tactical direction, and whether a high-risk managerial gamble will strengthen the team or fracture the group. At the sharp centre of the controversy is a squad vote, a private ritual exposed in public that has revealed deep fissures in group loyalty. A captaincy or leadership vote is usually a quiet affirmation of hierarchy and mutual respect. When it becomes headline news, it signals that the underlying social contract within the club has been disturbed. The vote did not simply name a preferred captain, it became the symbol of a larger identity crisis. Younger players voting for a fresh voice, older leaders preferring continuity, and a faction that whispered about loyalty versus innovation all converged into one moment that the media seized and turned into a public litmus test. What followed was not merely commentary, but the beginning of a narrative, camps, speculation, and an accelerating question. Can a manager implement a radical tactical roadmap without first securing unequivocal internal buy-in? Then there is the manager's gamble, a tactical alignment that many analysts describe as elegant on paper but precarious in practice. Managers experiment constantly in training and pre-season. This instance is different because it asks established stars to subordinate themselves to a new system that reduces individual freedom and amplifies collective discipline. The intention is clear: create sharper transitions, press higher, and extract more control over moments that used to be the product of improvisation and individual genius. The underlying belief is that long-term structural rigor yields sustainable success. The obvious tension, however, is human. Stars accustomed to roaming and venting are now asked to adhere to scientifically timed triggers and positional discipline, to execute off-ball pressing curves at precise moments, and to trade spectacular moments for marginal, repeatable gains. That trade-off demands trust the manager must earn, and which the squad vote exposed as fragile. Overlaying these two dynamics is a controversial signing who arrived amid fan celebration and locker room skepticism. Transfers have the capacity to unite new blood, renewed hope, and a shared objective. But when a signing is perceived as the product of boardroom optics or outside pressure rather than footballing fit, it becomes aware. The signing's previous numbers were undeniably attractive: goal contributions per 90, progressive carries, and a style that thrived under a manager who gave creative license. What teammates are asking, sometimes quietly and sometimes not so quietly, is whether that same player can accept a role that may ask him to sacrifice individual stats for structural benefit. When the arrival's narrative is framed as a business triumph and the adaptation looks slow in training, suspicion metastasizes into factional talk. Those who back the move defending their decision publicly and private, and others who question whether short-term marketing calculus overrode internal coherence. The effects of these tensions are tangible on the pitch. A team that previously found rhythm in intuitive interplay has started misveering in critical zones. The final third sees rushed options where patience once created chance. Pressing triggers sometimes happen out of phase, leaving the backline exposed to quick counters. And the midfield now toggles between overcommitment and cautious sheltering, failing to dominate transitional moments. Analysts looking at the new formation note that it increases the physical and cognitive load on midfielders, asking them to cover larger zones and make split-second decisions about when to press, when to hold, and when to invert. When that decision-making dissolves under competitive pressure, the result is not just lost games but fracture. Players uncertain about their responsibilities, staff nervous about consistency, and fans who begin to doubt whether the plan was ever appropriate for the squad assembled. Media narratives fed on the instability. Pundits framed the situation in familiar binary language: leadership versus vision, loyalty versus innovation. Conservative voices characterized the manager as rigid and authoritarian. Progressive voices praised the ambition but warned about timing and player buy-in. In the digital theatre of social media, the story accelerated. A clipped training video suggesting tension, a player's curt post misread as a jab, an old interview resurrected to serve new narratives. Fans, empowered by platforms, enacted their own verdicts, online polls, trending hashtags, and organised boards pressuring executives for clarity. When internal processes leak, even well-intended transparency can become fuel for speculation. The media's role here is not neutral. Outlets shape incentive structures, and sensational frames can quickly compress complexity into digestible but reductive stories that demand immediate response, provoking board members to act under scrutiny rather than reflection. Beneath the theatrics, however, lie strategic dilemmas that no headline can resolve. The manager's reasoning has its merits. Modern elite football reward systems that minimize variance. Coordinated pressing, structured positional rotations, and reproducible attacking sequences are more resilient across seasons than brilliance that depends on individual form. The manager points to training metrics, improved expected goals, XG patterns in controlled scenarios, effective pressing rates during simulated opposition models, and conditioning data suggesting the squad can sustain higher intensity demands. Proponents argue the shift is inevitable. The question is whether it is being executed with the required patience and communication. Football history includes coaches whose visions arrived ahead of cultural readiness, leading to short-term pain and long-term gain. But it also includes examples where tactical arrogance alienated squads and resulted in precipitous decline. Economics deepened the pressure. The club's financial architecture, restructured aggressively after recent fiscal crises and aimed at restoring sustainability, permits marquee moves but compresses the tolerance window for poor performance. Sponsors and global partners demand return on investment in visibility and success, while Champions League revenues underpin key budgetary forecasts. A stuttering domestic campaign can cascade into broader commercial consequences, reduced matchday revenue, less favourable broadcast narratives, and diminished bargaining power in sponsorship negotiations. Add to that amortization schedules, player wage commitments, and agent relationships. Every tactical misstep begins to feel like a financial leak, and the board's appetite for patience dwindles accordingly. In this environment, decisions that would once be purely sporting accrue weighty monetary significance. Historical parallels offer both warnings and templates. Clubs that installed systems without securing buy-in often suffered slippage, while those that blended tactical evolution with interpersonal sensitivity survived turbulence. Barcelona itself has swung between these poles across eras. There were seasons in which a charismatic captain could paper over tactical shortcomings, and others where a visionary coach's approach transformed the club's DNA. The lesson is that neither charisma nor philosophy alone suffices. Successful change is the intersection of coherent ideas and honest, inclusive implementation. When leaders forget that the human element legitimizes strategy, they risk creating elegant plans that fail because people, players, staff, and supporters do not feel part of the journey. So what can practical next steps look like, and what should viewers watch for in the coming weeks? First, internal diplomacy. Decisive, private conversations with key voices in the locker room can re-establish mutual understanding. A manager who listens and visibly adapts his implementation, not his vision, but the cadence of adoption, often reclaims credibility. Tactical phasing can help. Introduce the more demanding principles incrementally, allowing senior players to lead the learning curve rather than expecting instantaneous perfection. Second, leadership interventions. Appoint or reaffirm respected intermediaries who can translate tactical nuance into actionable guidance on the pitch. The captaincy is symbolic but consequential. A leader who communicates the manager's demands in the language of teammates becomes the bridge between concept and execution. Third, surgical market moves. A short-term loan, a targeted signing who embodies the desired style, or clearing away individuals whose presence undermines cohesion can change social geometry without demolishing the squad. Fan reaction will remain a volatile element. Many supporters initially tolerated the experimental phase because good faith belief in the club's long-term plan persisted. but tolerance thins when losses accumulate and speculative narratives harden into mistrust. It is therefore vital that club leaders demonstrate transparency that is substantive rather than performative. A candid communication strategy that explains process, acknowledges errors, and offers timelines for recalibration can turn anger into conditional support. Fans want to be respected and consulted as stakeholders. They do not need minute-by-minute updates, but they do demand a sense that the institution is led by people who understand both the emotional and technical sides of the club. The transfer market offers potential fixes and additional pitfalls. Bringing in one or two well-suited players who both embody the new style and have leadership attributes can shift the dressing room balance. Conversely, offloading a disruptive presence can clear psychological space for the rest of the squad. Yet markets are messy. Agents negotiate leverage, rival clubs sniff weakness, and timing windows constrain moves. Clever short-term deals, loans with options, performance-linked clauses can act as pressure valves. But such maneuvers require governance courage and clarity about the club's identity. If business decisions are made primarily for optics or quick revenue, the playing group will be the first to notice the misalignment. At the human level, the toll of public scrutiny is often underappreciated. Players face physical demands, and the mental strain of knowing every misstep will be amplified, replayed, and debated. Younger talents especially need stability and mentorship to develop. Organizational churn stunts growth. Veterans, whose reputations were forged over years, perceive public disagreement as existential. Mental health and support networks matter. Clubs that invest in psychological resources and trusted internal advisors fare better when headlines turn ugly because they provide the quiet architecture that helps people perform under pressure. The club's well-being plan is not tangential to success. It is an operational necessity in modern elite football. Looking at potential match scenarios clarifies stakes. When the system clicks against an opponent that plays a high line or commits numbers forward, it can suffocate them, create turnovers in dangerous zones, and yield high-quality chances. But when it fails, the consequences are sharp. Open counters, increased defensive errors, and a loss of tempo that invites stadium unrest. The next set of fixtures functions as both a sporting and social test. Can the manager produce early evidence that the plan yields incremental improvement, or will the team's performance validate critics and intensify calls for change? Coaches understand how thin the margin is between being lauded for long-term vision and being judged for short-term failure. The board's calculus will be shaped by these evolving dynamics. Executives must weigh the cost of immediate interference against the risk of inaction. Precedents show that ill-timed managerial changes can compound instability, so can obstinate refusal to act when the social contract has collapsed. The most prudent path often lies in calibrated interventions. Create conditions for dialogue, define measurable short-term objectives, and reserve structural changes for clear empirical thresholds. The club's commercial partners will watch closely. Preserving sponsor confidence requires narrative management as much as competitive results. A well-executed mid-course correction can reassure markets and bring stability. International media will narrate the story with national spin, which matters because global perception affects brand value. Opponents study tactical patterns for exploitable tendencies, and sports directors monitor unrest for opportunistic recruitment. Celebrity spokespeople, former legends, and pundits can accelerate momentum in one direction or another. The club's ability to manage external voices through consistent messaging and careful engagement with former players and brand ambassadors is crucial. When external commentary becomes coordinated, it can either help normalize the club's approach or apply relentless pressure that dislodges leadership. Youth development is a strategic lever that cannot be ignored. Academy graduates carry the club's cultural DNA and often act as stabilizers in moments of institutional uncertainty. Promoting the right young player at the right time sends three signals: a commitment to continuity, an investment in identity, and a belief that the solution can be grown internally. That said, youth integration must be coupled with practical support. Premature exposure without proper mentorship risks damaging promising careers. The club's long-term reputation as a developer of talent hinges on handling these transitions carefully. There are alternative, nuanced outcomes that often get lost in the simplicity of punditry. Success may be partial, domestic form restored while European inconsistency persists, or vice versa. There may be a mid-season tactical pruning that stabilizes results and keeps the larger project intact. Or the club could face a more thorough reset, prompted by cumulative losses and a transfer market that fails to provide reinforcements. Each path has costs and trade-offs. The best course is rarely obvious in August, but often visible in retrospect. Supporters and stakeholders should watch for concrete signals rather than headline rhetoric. Visible acts of coalition building, such as the manager attending a closed-door meeting with senior players, or a respected captain reading the narrative publicly and offering clarifying context, matter. Tactical evidence on the field, even in small increments, will persuade more than words. The board's willingness to make thoughtful market moves and clear the air transparently will determine whether the season becomes a narrative of recovery or decline. In the end, the crisis is a mirror. It reflects the club's ambitions, governance choices, and capacity for renewal. Barcelona has weathered storms before, often because its institutions combine passion with an ability to adapt. This moment is an opportunity as much as a danger, an invitation to align philosophy with people, to reconcile charismatic personalities with collective clarity, and to model how modern football institutions can evolve without losing their essence. The coming weeks will determine whether this chapter becomes a cautionary footnote or the prelude to a renewed era. Fans will watch with hope and impatience. Pundits will conjecture with the confident rhythms of certainty they rarely deserve. Players will continue to train and to play, and the beautiful unpredictability of the game will ensure that no narrative is final until the whistle validates or upends it. The next fixtures will not just be matches on a calendar. They will be litmus tests of leadership, cohesion, and the pragmatic courage to adapt when the cost of being right in theory is too high in practice. That is the story unfolding at Barcelona now, and it is one that will matter not just to supporters in the stadium, but to the wider world that studies how great institutions survive and reinvent themselves amid crisis.